Okay, welcome back. We're still on page 83 talking about the 3 or 4 different types of CSS. An inline CSS, an embedded CSS, and an external. And I'm not actually going to demo the external because it's easy to describe. The external is inside my head here. I just put a link tag, and the link tag points to a CSS file. That's the best of all three for most scenarios because having it here does separate presentation from content, but if I was to change the color on all of my web pages, this would be kind of tedious. If I pulled it out and put it in a separate file, then I'm back to the edit one and done scenario, or I go to that CSS file, change that color in one place, and then all text in all of my documents everywhere change. Cool. All right. Whew. All right, let's continue. So there's this. In this context here, there's a thing called a selector. This first part is called a selector. And basically, it's like a filter. What it basically says is, where do you want this to apply? Well, I told it I wanted to apply to the P tag, okay? So I'm going to go down here and do a block quote. And do Mary Had a Little Lamb. So, just looking at this, is the first one going to be red and the second one not going to be red? Yep, that's the whole idea. Because the selector said, apply this style to the P tag, not the block quote tag, the P tag. So that's what selectors do. So, bottom line, selector means which tags do you want this style to apply to? And if you want more than one, we'll show you how to do that. But right now, that's pretty cool. And then there's a declaration. So everything inside these curly braces is called a declaration. So the declaration basically has two parts. It has what's called a declaration property, like color, and then a colon. And then after the colon, then there's what's called a declaration value. Okay. So, if I was to, my machine has what's called IntelliSense turned on. If I go here and type colon, I get a list of all these things. And that's pretty cool because maybe I don't know the name of the color, but I'll spot it when I go, oh yeah, that's what I want. I want that one. I mean, I didn't know it was called coral, but I can go in there. Ooh, crimson. Okay, and then list all these things. And if you don't have an editor that does this, well, you can just close your eyes and type the word red and figure out what you got. So light red and dark red and those kinds of things. I'm going to do, well anyway, okay, I'm going to put it back to red. Okay, so two parts, a declaration, property and value. The list of these properties is coming up in a table for just a second, but let's just continue. So let's say, for example, I wanted to have multiple declarations. Well, it's still inside the same set of curly braces, but you'd use a semicolon here and then go to the next one. So this is going to make the text red, but what about background color? So I'm going to do background, and since I don't like typing, I'm just going to use the arrow keys to get down here and say background color. And then I'm going to say, I don't know, blue. All right, this is probably going to look atrocious, but that's not really the point. By the way, they follow a pretty cool naming convention. Whenever there's like two words to one of these declaration properties, like background color or line height or one of those things, it's almost always separated by a dash, which makes it pretty cool. If you kind of remember that, then it makes it a little easier. I'm going to go ahead and render this. It's going to look atrocious. I told you. Okay, but it does work. So, multiple declarations inside the same set of curly braces separated by a semicolon. Okay, cool. All right, so let's do something else. I'm going to do color red, and then I'm going to go underneath here and do another one. And I'm going to say color yellow. Well, it should be fairly obvious that I've kind of sort of got a conflict here. I mean, what's going to happen? Is it going to be red? Is it going to be yellow? Is it going to be orange? Maybe it's like mixing paint colors together. What do you think? No, it's nothing that exotic. It is like coats of paint. It's going to put them in the order in which they show up. So, again, that's pretty atrocious, but that's yellow on blue. So if there are multiple ones, it does them like coats of paint. It paints the wall red and then follows and paints it yellow. And so whichever paint color comes last, that's the one that sticks. Okay, cool. So, if I ask you in a test question, do the order of these statements matter? Yeah, particularly if there's a conflict. Now, I'll admit, if there's not a conflict, right now, I'm doing text color here and then I'm doing line height or something. Well, no, it doesn't matter. But if there are conflicts, then the last one wins. Okay, cool. So, on page 85, there's table 3.1 that lists all of the common ones. And trust me, there are an awful lot of these guys. I mean an awful lot. And we're not going to cover them all. But some really cool ones like color and, stuff. So that's not bad. Okay. On page 85, they talk about different ways that you can talk about color. There are essentially, 3 or 4 ways to do this. So instead of saying I can't stand this. I'm gonna put this back to something halfway normal. Okay. Cool. Now we're back to red. Yay! By the way, it's perfectly okay to use a semicolon when there's nothing else after that. In fact, a lot of people use a semicolon at the end just so that if you ever came back to add something to it, you wouldn't forget the semicolon, because if you forget the semicolon, it's going to complain. All right, so I've already shown that you can use the word red. There's another one, and this one's kind of weird. It uses hexadecimal, strange stuff, so just bear with me. I'm using a pound sign, okay? And I'm going to say FF0000. Now, I know this looks ridiculous, and who's going to remember hexadecimal stuff? I'm, for example, by the way, I'm never going to have a test question that says, do the math and tell me what that is. Okay, that's not what this course is all about. So essentially what that means is, you've probably heard the term, RGB, red, green, blue. So what this basically means is, this is broken up into, there's 6 characters here. The first 2 is for red, the second 2 is for, G, green, and the last 2 is for B, blue, so RGB. This hexadecimal value of FF is basically, it's a value called, it's 255, but it's like 100%. So what I basically said is, that's 100% red, 0% green, and 0% blue. Okay, so as you can probably imagine, this is going to look identical to before, because it's still red, I'm just doing it differently. Okay, so that's one way. There's other ways you can do this. So in the old days, we had, most of the computers only had displays that could handle 256 colors, right? Okay, so in the old days. And you couldn't use all the 256 because the Windows itself, I'm speaking of Windows, but hey, give me a break. Windows itself used an awful lot of the colors itself. So the number of colors that were left over that had not already been used was about 216. So there were 216 web-safe colors that you could use. And that's where those words came from. So the words, there's not words for, kind of sort of bluish green. The words there's like, I think, there's, a couple hundred words to describe these things. I'm just telling you how it got there, the 216 words that make up the colors. Okay, there's another way you can do this instead of having this hexadecimal, because if you're not a programmer, hexadecimal is like, what? So there's another one called using a thing where you type RGB and then a parentheses. And in here, you can put non-hexadecimal numbers like 255, 0, 0. It's the same thing. It's just instead of using hexadecimal numbers, I'm using decimal numbers. And once again, let's not get bogged down in the details here. That is essentially the same as the FF0000. Okay. All right. So let's go through it. There are 3 major techniques, a 4th one which we're not going to use. The first one is hexadecimal numbers. Well, actually, the first one is the name. Okay, so the first one is the name, red. Second one is this hexadecimal thing. The third thing is this RGB using decimal. And there is a 4th one called hue, saturation, and in lightness. It works just like RGB, except it's HSL. And again, if you're not a graphic artist, your eyes are probably just rolling in the back of your head going, dude, look, I just want it red, okay? So I fall into that category. I typically just use words. I look at it this way. If I'm after a color that doesn't have a name, then I'm probably not using it right. Okay? That's what I'm telling you. Now, there is a cool thing that you can do with RGB and the other one. And that is you can do transparencies. And we're not doing transparencies here, but later on we're going to come up with some really cool transparency thing using that. I can't use transparencies with the word, and I can't use transparencies with the hexadecimal, but I sure the heck can use it using this thing. Okay, so just stay tuned for later developments on that. Okay, one of the things you have to worry about when you have crazy stuff, like here, if I said, background color blue, like we had before, is how accessible is this? Because vision impaired people need a lot of contrast between the background. So thankfully there's actually a place you can go to do this, and that is there's a web accessibility tool. We can go in there and actually say, for example, I'm using FF0000 and my background is going to be 0000FF. Cool. And it's going to say, I'm sorry, you fail. This is not accessible because not enough contrast between the foreground and the background. All right. So this is a very cool tool. So whenever you're designing one of these things, you kind of sort of need to keep that stuff in mind. All right. Let's go back to page 87, talking about the inline CSS. So back to my example here. Inline CSS requires a style attribute. So I'm just going to take this out. Doink. Okay. So inline, I'm still using the word style, but now I'm using it as an attribute, not as an element or tag. So style. Well, dang, if I could type, equals. Then I'm going to type color equals red. Well, wait a minute. What's different between this and the other one? Well, when I had the thing in the embedded, I had to have, there was 2 parts to this thing. I had a selector, remember the P with a space, and then what I wanted to do, right? Okay. Well, here I don't have a selector. I don't have P space curly braces, color, red. Why is that? Why do I not have a selector in an embedded tag? An embedded CSS. What's that? I can't hear you. Could you turn your microphone up? I can't hear your answer. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, just for dramatic pause, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, and we'll answer that question in just a few.